dog in your life is thinking? Well, join me, Liz Murdoch, animal communicator, talking with the dogs and finding out what dogs want people in their lives to know and understand. I've spent my life talking and listening to animals. So if you consider yourself a dog person or just happen to have a dog, I'm here to help you learn how to talk or listen to the dogs in your life. I chat with people too, sharing stories and tips on exactly how animal communication or being a dog whisperer makes an impact at home or when working with the dogs. So welcome to Talking with the Dogs podcast, a place where we uncover exactly what dogs want us to know and celebrate that every dog has a story. Welcome to Talking with the Dogs. I'm Liz Murdoch. Today we have Sunil Godse, who is an intuition specialist from Intuitionology, his own company, his podcast. And I found Sunil because I wanted to help people who are still skeptical of animal communication and trusting their gut and intuition on a regular basis. So I thought I need to find somebody who also does this, who can help people come round, because everybody always says, yeah, I've had it every so often, I just knew. So Sunil and I today are going to talk about how you can learn to trust it better and why it's so important. So Sunil, welcome. I would like you to share a bit on why you picked intuition as something that has to be our mainstream kind of way we share our lives with people.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on your podcast show. I really appreciate it. And you and I can went back and forth on intuition and animals. And when intuition comes into play, it's incredibly important when it comes to relationships between others, but also with, believe it or not, with animals. And it's a two-way intuitive type of signal that they have. And in fact, in my podcast interview with Nick Bradley, who's a scaling expert, the videogram that I have at the start was him sensing that something was wrong with his dog. Right. And he phoned his mother, and he had found, even though his mom said nothing had happened, his dog got shot by the neighbor. And I've had a couple of people who had their intuition sensed through their service dog, and the service dog not wanting to go down an alleyway or sensing something was wrong with someone, and being in tune with their service dog got that extension of intuition after they lost their sight, which is obviously because you can't see people. I really started my journey after I wrote my first book called Fail Fast, Succeed Faster. And the premise of that book was, if you were able to look at and hear stories of failure from others, and you learned the lessons from that, then you should actually be able to succeed faster, because you already know that they failed, so you're not going to repeat them. When I used to speak on stages around the world, entrepreneurs used to ask me, okay, Sunil, give me the one thing that's going to be successful, make me successful. And I said, well, there's a whole reason why I interviewed 300 people, and there's a whole reason why there's 75 stories in the book. But when I went back to the audio recordings, it was really incredible that 80 to 90% of them used some form of version of, I should have trusted my gut. I should have trusted, I knew what I should have done. And some version of that, right, called which is circled around intuition. And it was really interesting that, entrepreneurs and business people who you would think are data-driven start talking about this intangible thing called intuition. And so that got me really looking deep into intuition. So I asked myself, okay, so let me reflect on the times when I had intuition in my life. And the first time I remember having my first brush with intuition was when I was 5 years old. And I had these video games that I wanted to buy. And my dad said, no, they're too expensive. And I remember this distinct voice telling me to go door to door to raise money, and which I did. And so I raised $200. $100 went to my dad, and the other $100 went to charity, because that was what my school was doing. I felt really good about that. But when I reflected on the times that I ignored my intuition, there were three incidences that come up right away. And the first was, being South Asian son, there's 4 states that you have for a career. It's doctor, lawyer, engineer, or failure. And that's it as an East Indian son. So I picked door number 3. I went into engineering, even though my intuition was saying I needed to be an entrepreneur. I got 3 years in doing that. In the second year of the third year, I got a chance to become an investor with a Mexican restaurant chain called Senior Frogs and bring that chain up to Canada. Pretty soon, I started making 5 times in dividends than I was in full-time engineering. Why did I ignore these somethings? Like, what was this thing about intuition that I ignored? Why did I ignore it? And so to me, it was really kind of, okay, how do I define it? But then I kind of need to see a little bit of proof. Like, so, and if I'm going to write a book for the masses, I'm sure I need scientific evidence that intuition exists, because intuition is a very personal phenomenon. So how you define it is not up to me, and how I define it is not up to you. So the science was very solid in terms of me bringing that. And in my book, Gut, which everybody can get, is a free ebook on my website. It has a lot of the science in it. So now I know there's sort of the scientific perspective. And on top of that, I said, okay, who in my circle do I know that can talk about it from a scientific perspective? And lo and behold, there's a neurologist I have as a colleague. I reached out to him, and the first thing I said was, Michelle, does intuition exist? And I turn on the camera, and he says, it absolutely does. He goes into a scientific explanation, and he actually says, and in some cases, there's more and more research that's showing that it's comes well before we actually make a decision. So he's now a neurologist, respected neurologist, already. I mean, I've already got the research, but he's yet another level saying, yes, it exists. And he talks about his patients. When his patients feel that something is wrong, he believes them. And so it's up to him, using evidence-based medicine, to figure out what that something is that they're being bothered. So the science is very, very clear when it comes to intuition. One of the 4 types of intuition is called experiential intuition. And when you're born, it pulls the experiences and puts it in the subconscious area of your brain like a library. And it continues to do that. So when you're making a decision, it pulls those experiences out that's relevant to the decision you're making or the relationship that you're in. And it says, okay, here's what's happened in the past, good and bad. Right. And that's what you need to think about. And then there's a second type of intuition called creative intuition. And that's a type of intuition that says sometimes you make some decisions that are really nutso, that nobody understands it but you, because it's your intuition. It's been cathartic. I mean, testimonial after testimonial, people's lives have changed. But the premise is that this intangible called intuition, there's proof, there's connection. I've had people who sense that their family members had cancer. People halfway around the world get into an accident, and someone's able to sense that. And these are consistent stories of connection that you have, whether it's a person or an animal or what have you. That connection is there. And I remember I was in Toronto, and I was speaking about intuition with an interviewee. There happened to be an Indigenous gentleman who joined the table. And so I started asking him, how did you guys use intuition in the past? And what he was saying is that intuition is so heightened with the animals that they used to look at the animals. Right. And if there was something wrong with the animals, they had at least a 2 or 3 day head start before something dangerous,
like the weather changes
or there's danger coming, or they can sniff something that there's enemies coming, whatever it was. They had at least a day or two, and they didn't have cars and all that stuff. They just picked up their teepees and all their gear, and they just moved. But if they hadn't been for the animals that they connected with,
alerting,
they would be dead.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's that connection with people, with animals, but that's how powerful it is. And there's a lot more research now showing there's things called mirror neurons that's right in the front. So yours and eyes are actually mirroring each other. And the science behind that is that it's all energy, right? And so once there's energy, it's connected, then you and I can actually physically separate. And if we've got a really strong relationship, then we would be energetically connected, even though we don't have to be physically in the same space. So that's sort of where the research is kind of correlating and extrapolating or connecting the dots to things that can be explained. And these things that can be explained happen too many times for it to be coincidental. Right. There's too many people saying the same thing, too many people experiencing the same thing. It can't be coincidence.
So in my work now with COVID and the animals and my clients, I used to do it in person, And then I transitioned to the phone and they'd send me a picture. And now the dogs are coming right up to the screen because I can connect so quickly with them. I want you to talk about how, because people are coming around. It's one thing to trust your own gut, but then to think, oh gosh, how can someone get a sense from an animal? How does that work? And I've been working on explaining, and you've got the research to back it up. Like for me, I'm like in that first category that you talked about. I just get it. I feel it. I hear it. In one of your specialties, I noticed is helping people identify that what's theirs. And so like I will tell people when I teach you to tune to your dog, that you may not get the hearing that I get, where I try and get the right word that the dog wants me to use. But you might be really good with feelings in your body, a particular student. How does that work from your research when you find that different people have different skills, at least when they're initially becoming aware of it, how they receive an intuitive message? What does the science show on that?
Yeah. When it comes to the science, there's one where, so a lot of people talk about that gut feeling or feelings in the body. And what happens is when the neurons hit the amygdala, it's sort of your fight or flight thing, but that's also where you feel things. There's no language around it. But when your intuition hits that particular part of your brain, then it looks to your body for signals and sensations. And so you feel things. You might feel things in your bodily sensation, but in some cases, people see like orbs, left earlobes go hot. People see omens. People have that gut. They hear a voice. And it's very individual for every single person. And so we all have a set, and there's areas when you're sensing someone else's, intention. There's areas in the brain that lights up. And again, in gut, I've got the brain scan that shows in particular areas where researchers have mapped that get highlighted when you intuitively know something's up with someone.
Right.
So that's the science part. Individually, we all have our own basket of positive signals and negative signals. And the easiest exercise for anybody listening, even now, after they finish listening to me ramble about intuition, is that they can go back and look to the past, to a decision that they made, whether it's good or bad. And what did it feel like in the moment, right? And if it felt, once you know what it felt like, that's an intuitive signal. So if it's the decision that you made, what was that signal? And then is that the first signal, or is that the third signal? This is the other thing you have to think about. And what about a bad decision? What signal did you get then? What did you feel like? Again, was it the fourth signal or was it the second signal? And you really have to keep digging at that. And one of the best things you can do is really get into something called an intuitive medium. So you go into an area that something like some people take a walk. In the shower, I think about these things where you can cut out the noise and think about these things. So you go to these things and you get your basket of signals, and you have to be very careful to make sure that you get the first signal, because if it's signal number 3, which happened to be a voice, for example, that's great. But what was signal number 2 and signal number 1? If that was signal number 1, fantastic. But if it's signal number 3, that means you've missed 2 signals. If you've missed 2 signals, that means you made 2 bad decisions. So that could be that maybe you stubbed your toe on a door, or it could be that you're just about to get into a relationship with an abusive person. And so that's where it's really important to figure out what your signals are. And you take that time, and you can do that right now after this podcast.
Wait a minute. So go back. What a signal that you've missed. You stubbed your toe.
Yeah.
So that's because you missed a signal to walk around.
You have. So let's say you got into let's say a bad relationship. Okay. What was the signal initially that you should leave, right? And if that signal was let's say a headache, was that headache signal number 3? Maybe signal number 2 was as soon as he enters or she enters, you get an uneasy feeling. Maybe signal number 1 was the whisper. So now what you've got is the let's say headache, for example, but you've missed the whisper and you've missed the uneasy feeling. So what you need to do is think about that event and think, okay, was that the first time that I felt that I needed to leave this person? Then you go one step before. No, it wasn't. And every single time, everybody will be able to recall when was the first incident that they were able to triggered. Maybe a value got crossed. Maybe it was a signal before they even got married. I mean, that's a common one. A number of people walking down the aisle knew that this was not going to work. And the only time they reveal it to me was when I talked to them, because nobody's ever asked them that question.
Okay. So you're saying, so if someone wants to, whether listening or, wants to figure out how to tune into their intuition, they can go back to a time in their life, an experience that didn't go the way they wanted, and see whether they can think of whispers or nudges before that incident actually happened.
Yes. And both good and bad. Both good and bad.
Having awareness of that can help them have confidence, because that's a big thing that we both know about, is you can get a knowing sense, but then you have to trust it and then have the confidence, like the man who quit the job or built a franchise in a location that he typically, it wouldn't make sense, but he had a feeling, I need to do that. Okay, perfect.
And the thing is, once you have these inventory of signals, now whatever decision that comes up, you'll know whether it's the right one or wrong one, because you have those signals that you've already researched that are going to come up, and you paid attention to them. So now they're going to be a little bit more heightened. Whereas if, like, let's say you had a whisper before and you ignored it, and you know that now, that every time I ignore this whisper, bad things happen to me. So the next time you make a decision and that whisper comes up, you're going to think to yourself, I'm not going to make that mistake again, because my intuition is saying this whisper means that I'm making a bad decision for whatever reason. And you'll know, you can't necessarily vocalize it. There's no point in finding out the other side. Like, if I make that bad decision, what's around the corner? Forget it. Like, make the right decision, because you don't know what that bad decision is, and who cares what the bad decision is, right? It doesn't make sense going down that road.
Yeah. When I am working with the dog, and sometimes they tell me crazy things, I get this sense, and I understand, like you say, we filter it through our past experience. And, for people who I get calls from people, I've listened, I'm finally ready to work with you because I've been listening to all these things. I have a lot of experience working with dogs in so many different ways, from training to animal assisted therapy, to going into homes, evaluating if a dog is a right fit for that home. A busy dog moving into a house without a fence is not a good match. So I see how I'm filtering it through all of that when I try and get the word or what the dog is sharing with me to bring it into words for a client. But I do get a sense. So say I'm talking to this dog, when I feel like I have it correctly. For instance, I had a dog that at the end of my sessions, I always say, okay, tell me whatever you want. What do you want your person to know? No matter what it is. And they will tell me things like, this one dog said, move your desk 90 degrees. She was sitting in her home office and the dog wanted her to move it 90 degrees. And I'm like, okay, because I know to say what I get. And she verifies that she'd been thinking about doing it. And I said, oh no, your dog says stop deliberating. It was the word. And she said, I have been deliberating. I've never even told my husband this. Nobody knows I've been thinking about this. And I said, well, your dog is like, just get it done. So she did it, and she sent me a picture. And I said, oh, you need to put a dog bed right over there. I had a knowing sense. And she did, and the dog sleeps there now.
Wow.
But yeah. And it's changed her business because she has a whole shift. But when I'm done like with that kind of thing, I get this feeling like I've just taken a deep breath and exhaled, and I know I'm done in my body.
Yeah.
And so do you have a knowing sense of when you're done with a decision or with a client or something that you feel?
Absolutely.
Does everybody get the same kind of thing? They get a done sense?
Yeah, I'll know a couple of things. One, I'll know when I'm done, and I'll know when I'm extending into extra space that I shouldn't be in. And I absolutely know this. Sometimes it could be my body sensing it. Sometimes I just know the way I feel is I know I'm in overtime. I just know when it crosses. If I get into overtime, I got to finish something quickly or find a cutoff point quickly where I can just tie it off and then work on it the next day, or not, come back after supper or something like that. But I definitely know. So one's a signal from my body. The other one is just that I can feel it. I can feel it. And it comes on very, very quickly. The other thing is when you get into people like yourself who do these kind of things, sometimes we get boxed into a belief system And that belief system doesn't allow us to think outside the box until we experience things. So for example, if you look at some of the people that I've had on my podcast series, I had one who died for 37 seconds and had a near-death experience and actually knew what the doctors were thinking. And it came out in a hypnotherapy session. This is Stephanie Arnold. And they said, how do you know that? Like, you should know that because her eyes were taped shut and she had a curtain over her on a C-section. You don't know. There's no way you should know who is in the room. When you take, for me, you take a lot of these different stories, and if you have a certain belief set, sometimes it's hard to extend outside of that. And when I started my interviews with intuition, I used to start my podcast interview questions with, when was there a time when intuition impacted your life? 100% of the time, it was when they hit rock bottom.
Yeah.
So it's almost like you have to hit rock bottom, or you have to overcome a belief set.
Yes.
To believe in somebody else's powers. Now, for me, because there's so many people that I interview that this happens to, and I'm open, that's the extension of intuition. It absolutely happens. So there's some tangible, intangible things that happen when you start talking about this thing called intuition. I mean, just look at relationships, right? You instantly know whether a relationship is right or, because you get this feeling. That's intuition. That's an intangible. So if that can extend past your belief system, then what you do becomes a reality because you have that talent. And if it doesn't, you don't have clients. It's very simple. You don't have clients. You don't have people sending you pictures. It just doesn't happen. Just ask. Maybe she has that talent. Maybe she has that ability to do it. And then what you do is you look for clues saying, that's really interesting. She was able to move that thing over and the dog finally slept. And wow, I have all these data points. Maybe I should think about extending my beliefs to just say, maybe.
For listeners. Yeah.
Yeah, to listeners, maybe.
The thing is that, like, people say, well, I don't know. I'll just go to my vet or something. It's like, well, vets are great, but not all instances of illness or a behavior issue are textbook cases that fit a mold. A dog might be allergic to something, or that they need some data that is not easily available. And so when I can share that, or another animal communicator, somebody who, like your medical intuitive person, I can do medical intuition as well, but some people can go so deep and that's all they do.
Yeah.
It's something that can enhance the well-being of the animal and the relationship with the person. So
yeah, and if you were to take that a step further, I mean, I talked about Stephanie Arnold, who died for 37 seconds. So 3 months prior to this, she foresaw her death. She foresaw that she was going to die on the table off of a routine C-section. All the medical evidence at the time was normal. She talked to one, I think it was a gynecologist, that said, the gynecologist's intuition was saying there's something up with this person. She really believes her story. I think let's just be careful, have a crash cart and extra units of blood, although nothing in her chart suggested that. Nothing. It was all normal. She has the C-section. Had that physician not asked for the crash cart and extra units of blood, Stephanie Arnold would be dead because she had the regular C-section. There's something called an AME. Her blood got infected. She died on the table. They needed the crash cart. They needed the extra units of blood because she predicted 3 months earlier that she would die. So that's one person. There's more and more. And so that's where you start connecting the dots with this sort of quote unquote evidence, saying that's really interesting.
Yes, it is. Well, it's also interesting that, like, her doctor was open to it and willing to listen. And for people who are new to trusting their intuition in terms of being vocal about it with their doctor or somebody else, it's good to realize that people are more willing to listen to you and not think you're crazy when you tell your doctor, oh, I had this intuitive feeling something might go wrong. Can we have extra supplies just in case? That people are more open about it. And the more we talk about it, the more everybody else can trust in it and be willing to share the intuitive hits that they get.
I'm sure there's got to be a study at some point somewhere where they're going to actually say, okay, there's enough people this is happening to. how do we measure it, right? It's just that hasn't come up yet, or maybe it has. We just don't know. It hasn't been published yet. We don't know.
Yeah, not yet. Well, I liked when you pointed out about like the service dogs and the dogs for the blind.
Yeah.
Some of that is an intuitive that the person who's blind has got to trust. I'm going to find someone.
Yes.
They have to trust the nuance of the dog pulling slightly this way or that way, or freeze. Because I can feel when I work on with the dogs, the leash is like that conduit, and you can tell a lot by how a dog is reacting on that leash. A gentle nudge, of pulling a different way. So I love that. One of the things that I also like is, so here's one of my books. It's a journal that I have, and I have dots here because one of my themes, and I think anyone who works with intuition, without us, we just met, knows that we are constantly connecting the dots that we didn't see.
Yes.
But as we hone into our intuition, it's a lot of it is connecting the dots. So I think that's great that you are aware of that. And for those of you listening who are new to embracing your intuition, know that it's okay to have gaps in your understanding, and that the intuition is about filling in the dots to getting to understanding.
Yeah. And if people want, I have in my TEDx speech, I've got the MRIs shown in there, and in my main video, we'll be changing it to add some more MRIs in there. I also have a video from some of the big influencers that talk about intuition. You've got Jeff Bezos, you got Oprah Winfrey, you've got Sarah Blakely, Richard Branson, Tim Cook from Apple, of course, Steve Jobs, very famous with connecting the dots. And Harry Potter, the Harry Potter series came through intuition, right? She was sitting on a train.
Napkin. Yeah.
Boom, 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 right? It came through a train, and she says, ghosts, what kind of ghosts? She saw the school. She wasn't even writing for that stuff. That was an intuitive hit. And that launched the whole Harry Potter. And she was struggling. She was someone that had no self-esteem. And she was just not, she even says, I wasn't the most confident person, but yet it came. And
she kept
Harry
going.
Potter was born.
Because
she kept going.
It didn't sell right away. So that's another thing for those of you listening who are like, okay, I'll give it a try. Whether you're going to work with Sunil, you're going to work with me, you're going to just practice on your own, keep at it, because there's too many stories of, yes, bad things, we miss out on things if we don't trust it. But when we do trust it, it may take time, but there is a payoff when we are aligned, that deep exhale that feels good, or a bigger payoff. So I want, Sunil, I know people are going to want to find out more about you. What's the best way? Your podcast is great. It's easy to find. What's the best way? Email you? How should people?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's always intuitionology.com. They can grab a free ebook and go through the 7-day challenge. That's also free. So they can solve a problem using the components of intuition for themselves, and solve a relationship issue there. There's always Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook.
Clubhouse.
I'm there. Clubhouse. Yes, I've been on Clubhouse. And TikTok. I'm not going to do dancing on TikTok, but I will start giving you some stuff on intuition there. You can always email me, Sunil@sunilghatzi.com. Happy to answer any questions, or you can DM me on any one of the platforms. And happy to connect there. But yeah, lots of ways to connect with me. But yeah, just jump in, grab a free ebook, grab the free 7-day challenge, and you got a template already. You don't even have to know who I am, right? And you've got a template on how to make every single relationship decision, and you can move it forward. So.
Yeah, well, thank you. And if anyone listening wants to do this with your dog or have me help you, you know where to find me, Liz Murdoch, on Instagram. I have my 5 tips for tuning in with your dog. So if you're ready to jump in, DM me and I will get you my 5 tips so you can practice this with your dog right away. But either way, with Sunil and me, we've got you covered. We hope you'll start tuning in. A friend of mine who works with intuition and the brain, and she's a physical therapist, she told me that 2025 to 2040, the 15 years, is going to be the era of intuition.
Awesome.
So now's the perfect time to get started.
Yep.
And we just wish you all the best. I thank you, Sunil, for spreading your message. I'm so glad we had this time because we want to help people and pets, especially as we all come together during COVID with more time with our dogs. What better time to practice our intuition and prep for our own lives afterwards when we can go out. So I wish you the best. I know we'll be in contact again, but thank you so much. Ready to find out what your dog wants you to know? Visit talkingwiththedogs.com, book an appointment with me, and we'll find out.
Thanks for tuning in to Talking with the Dogs. Hope today's episode made you want to understand your own dog better and appreciate that every dog has a story and something to say. Subscribe now for more dog stories and insights into animal communication and what it's like to be a dog whisperer. Review this episode on Apple Podcasts or follow Talking with the Dogs on Instagram or Facebook and sign up for a chance for you and your dog to be a guest on the show. Whatever you do, I hope you'll spend time talking with the dogs.